guys, welcome back to my channel. So this week I'm doing printmaking using plaster. So you don't need any kind of press or paper, you just need your printing matrix and then plaster. So I have an upcoming project that I want to edition using this method. So rather than making that a really long video, I thought I'd do this separate one showing the process more in detail using a couple of old Mezzotint plates that I had. You can also use linoleum or probably even a woodcut if you sealed up the wood first, since it is plaster and water. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'd love to hear what you think. So let's go!
Here are all the materials I used to make this project, and I'll have these down in the description box as well. As far as the plaster is concerned, I would stick with just Plaster of Paris, the regular Plaster of Paris. And if you do try this out, I'd use an old printing plate to start out with, something you're not worried if it gets ruined, because I don't know what the long-term effects are going to be on the copper plates. And also make sure you use a breathing mask, dust mask when you're using Plaster of Paris, because you don't want to breathe it in. So the first steps to make the mold that you want to pour the plaster into. So using the piece of plastic, I position the plate, and then I put in wood strips to make the mold. And I'm gluing them down with a glue gun so it's a temporary bond that I can peel up later after the plaster has been poured and cured. And it also seals up around the edges of the wood. I'm also doing a second casting using a picture frame, so when it's all done you can simply just hang it on the wall and not have to do any cleanup to it. And I'm taping up the face and the sides of the frame so any plaster or dust that gets on there is easily removed. Then, using the same method as before, I use hot glue and glue it down to a piece of plastic. So the next step is to cut out a piece of this thin chicken wire that I picked up at my local craft store. So for the casting that's not going to be poured into the frame, I need to make a way to hang it when it's all done. So I'm tying on picture hanging wire directly onto the piece of wire mesh. Once this is cast into the plaster, this piece will stick out and let you hang it directly on a nail. It's important that the wire mesh is in the center of the casting. You don't want it up against the copper plate and you don't want to see it from the back. So using a couple of scraps of wood and some wires, I secured it so I can lower this and float it into the plaster once I pour it. And here you can see how you want the wire mesh to be suspended inside your mold. So for the picture frame casting, I don't want the plaster to slide out of the frame once I get it poured. So I'm securing a couple nails in there so they'll be embedded into the plaster, and this will keep the plaster and the frame as one piece and keep them from separating. So the next step is to ink up your plate. And I'm inking it just like I normally would any other Mezzotint. This is graphic chemical blue-black ink. And I might do a little bit less wiping than I normally would since the plaster might not soak up all the ink. So after wiping down the plate, you want to make sure you clean your edges very well, and also clean the back of the plate since you don't want any of the ink that's on the back to migrate into the plaster when it's still wet. Sometimes it can create like a marbling effect that you'll see. So now I position the plate inside the frame and then the piece of wire mesh inside as well. And I'm ready to start mixing up my plaster and start my pour. So you want to use cool water when you mix up your plaster. Since it's a chemical reaction, if you use warm water, it's going to set up really quick on you. And you want to make sure you mix it up really good, make sure there's no chunks left in the mix, and make sure that when it's done, it's like a thick pancake batter. And you'll have a couple minutes once you finish mixing it up, so don't rush yourself, just make sure you get it nice and smooth. So now that the plaster is all mixed up and ready to go, position your molds where you need them, nice and level, when they're not going to be disturbed, and then slowly pour in your plaster. And make sure when you pour that it's slow enough that it doesn't run across the plate quickly, because that'll pull the ink off, that'll create like a black swirl on the side of your plaster mold. Make sure you have the mesh submerged into the plaster so it doesn't show up, but make sure it's not touching the plate on the other side either. I let the plaster cure overnight, so then I go ahead and cut off the wire supports for the wood frame and then take away the wood supports that were around it. To help pull the copper plate out of the plaster, I'm just hot gluing a strip of wood onto it so it gives me a bit of a handle so I can peel it out, because you don't want to have to dig into the corners of your plaster too much. And then using an X-Acto blade, I scrape away along the edge of the plate until I can find the actual edge of copper where it meets the plaster. And then I cut along that seam so I have a nice smooth edge. And plaster is pretty brittle, so you want to be careful not to get too crazy with it or you'll start ripping chunks out of your plaster. And then for this casting, I'm doing the same thing. After waiting overnight, I go ahead and peel off the plastic and peel off the tape, and then using an X-Acto blade, scrape away along the copper plate again. And here we are, ready for the big reveal.
So this is where things went horribly wrong. Instead of using the regular plaster of Paris like I've done in the past, I used a new kind of plaster. It was supposed to be unbreakable, super strong. Apparently it's completely repellent to oil-based ink and didn't take up any of the ink like it normally should. So I did it again using the regular plaster of Paris, but I thought I'd leave this in here so you guys can learn from my mistakes.
So following the exact same steps as I did the first time, I get to the end, scrape off the plaster around the edge of the plate, And I'm ready for the big reveal. Again, using the X-Acto blade for a little bit of encouragement on the corners, here it is. So I'm happy with how it turned out. I think it looks pretty cool. And I'm going to experiment a bit more with using a little bit more ink, less ink, to see what looks better. But I think now when I use this for the upcoming project where I do the actual addition in plaster, I think I'll have a good handle on it. And here you have a finished work of art that you can hang on the wall because the wire is already cast right into that. Or if you use the picture frame method, you can hang it like that and you're good to go.
Alright, so that's it for this video. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.